Book 7, Chapter 1. Dead now was that evil and shameful youth of mine, and I was passing into full manhood. As I increased in years, the worse was my vanity, for I could not conceive of any substance but the sort I could see with my own eyes. I no longer thought of thee, O God, by the analogy of a human body. Ever since I inclined my ear to philosophy, I had avoided this error, and the truth on this point I rejoice to find in the faith of our spiritual mother, thy Catholic Church. Yet I could not see how else to conceive thee, and I, a man, and such a man, sought to conceive thee, the sovereign and only true God. In my inmost heart I believe that thou art incorruptible and inviolable and unchangeable, because, though I knew not how or why, I could still see plainly and without doubt that the corruptible is inferior to the incorruptible, the inviolable obviously superior to its opposite, and the unchangeable better than the changeable. My heart cried out violently against all phantasms, and with this one clear certainty I endeavored to brush away the swarm of unclean flies that swarmed around the eyes of my mind. But behold, they were scarcely scattered before they gathered again, buzzed against my face, and beclouded my vision. I no longer thought of God in the analogy of a human body, yet I was constrained to conceive thee to be some kind of body in space, either infused into the world or infinitely diffused beyond the world. And this was the incorruptible, inviolable, and unchangeable substance which I thought was better than the corruptible, the violable, and the changeable. For whatever I conceived to be deprived of the dimensions of space appeared to me to be nothing, absolutely nothing, not even a void. For if a body is taken out of space, or if space is emptied of all its contents, of earth, water, air, or heaven, yet it remains an empty space, a spacious nothing, as it were. Being thus gross-hearted, and not clear even to myself, I then held that whatever had neither length nor breadth nor density nor solidity, and did not or could not receive such dimensions, was absolutely nothing. For at that time my mind dwelt only with ideas, which resembled the forms with which my eyes are still familiar, nor could I see that the act of thought, by which I formed those ideas, was itself immaterial, and yet it could not have formed them if it were not itself a measurable entity. So also I thought about thee, O life of my life, as stretched out through infinite space, interpenetrating the whole mass of the world, reaching out beyond in all directions to immensity without end, so that the earth should have thee, the heaven have thee, all things have thee, and all of them be limited in thee, while thou art placed nowhere at all. As the body of the air above the earth does not bear the passage of the light of the sun, so that the light penetrates it, not by bursting nor dividing, but filling it entirely, so I imagined that the body of heaven and air and sea, and even of the earth, was all open to thee, and, in all its greatest parts as well as the smallest, was ready to receive thy presence by a secret inspiration, which, from within or without all, orders all things thou hast created. This was my conjecture, because I was unable to think of anything else. Yet it was untrue. For in this way a greater part of the earth would contain a greater part of thee, a smaller part, a smaller fraction of thee. All things would be full of thee in such a sense that there would be more of thee in an elephant than in a sparrow, because one is larger than the other and fills a larger space. And this would make the portions of thyself present in the several portions of the world in fragments, great to the great, small to the small. But thou art not such a one. But as yet thou hadst not enlightened my darkness. Chapter 2. But it was not sufficient for me, O Lord, to be able to oppose those deceived deceivers and those dumb orators, dumb because thy word did not sound forth from them, to oppose them with the answer which, in the old Carthaginian days, Nebridius used to propound, shaking all of us who heard it. What could this imaginary people of darkness, which the Manichaeans usually set up as an army opposed to thee, have done to thee, if thou hadst declined the combat? If they replied that it could have hurt thee, they would have then made thee violable and corruptible. If, on the other hand, the dark could have done thee no harm, then there was no cause for any battle at all. There was less cause for a battle in which a part of thee, one of thy members, a child of thy own substance, should be mixed up with opposing powers not of thy creation, and should be corrupted and deteriorated and changed by them from happiness into misery, so that it could not be delivered and cleansed without thy help. This offspring of thy substance was supposed to be the human soul to which thy word, free, pure, and entire, could bring help when it was being enslaved, contaminated, and corrupted. But on their hypothesis, that word was itself corruptible, because it is one and the same substance as the soul. And therefore, if they admitted that thy nature, whatsoever thou art, is incorruptible, then all these assertions of theirs are false and should be rejected with horror. But if thy substance is corruptible, then this is self-evidently false and should be abhorred at first utterance. This line of argument, then, was enough against those deceivers who ought to be cast forth from a surfeited stomach, for out of this dilemma they could find no way of escape without dreadful sacrilege of mind and tongue when they think and speak such things about thee. Chapter 3. But as yet, although I said and was firmly persuaded that thou art Lord, the true God, who made us not only our souls but our bodies as well, and not only our souls and bodies but all creatures and all things, was free from stain and alteration and in no way mutable, yet I could not readily and clearly understand what was the cause of evil. Whatever it was, I realized that the question must be so analyzed as not to constrain me by any answer to believe that the immutable God was mutable, lest I should myself become the thing that I was seeking out. And so I pursued the search with a quiet mind, now in a confident feeling that what had been said by the Manichaeans, and I shrank from them with my whole heart, could not be true. I now realized that when they asked what was the origin of evil, their answer was dictated by a wicked pride, which would rather affirm that thy nature is capable of suffering evil than that their own nature is capable of doing it. And I directed my attention to understand what I now was told, that free will is the cause of our doing evil, and that thy just judgment is the cause of our having to suffer from its consequences. But I could not see this clearly. So then, trying to draw the eye of my mind up out of that pit, I was plunged back into it again, and trying often, was just as often plunged back down. For one thing lifted me up toward thy light. It was that I had come to know that I had a will as certainly as I knew that I had life. When, therefore, I willed or was unwilling to do something, I was utterly certain that it was none but myself who willed or was unwilling, and immediately I realized that there was the cause of my sin. I could see that what I did against my will I suffered rather than did, and I did not regard such actions as faults, but rather as punishments in which I might quickly confess that I was not unjustly punished, since I believe thee to be most just. Who was it that put this in me, and implanted in me the root of bitterness, in spite of the fact that I was altogether the handiwork of my most sweet God? If the devil is to blame, who made the devil himself? And if he was a good angel who by his own wicked will became the devil, how did there happen to be in him that wicked will by which he became a devil, since a good creator made him wholly a good angel? By these reflections was I again cast down and stultified. Yet I was not plunged into that hell of error where no man confesses to thee, where I thought that thou didst suffer evil rather than that men do it. Chapter 4. For in my struggle to solve the rest of my difficulties, I now assumed henceforth as settled truth that the incorruptible must be superior to the corruptible, and I did acknowledge that thou, whatever thou art incorruptible. For there never yet was nor will be a soul able to conceive of anything better than thee, who art the highest and best good. And since most truly and certainly the incorruptible is to be placed above the corruptible, as I now admit it, it followed that I could rise in my thoughts to something better than my God, if thou wert not incorruptible. When, therefore, I saw that the incorruptible was to be preferred to the corruptible, I saw then where I ought to seek thee, and where I should look for the source of evil, that is, the corruption by which thy substance can in no way be profaned. For it is obvious that corruption in no way injures our God, by no inclination, by no necessity, by no unforeseen chance, because he is our God, and what he wills is good, and he himself is that good. But to be corrupted is not good, nor art thou compelled to do anything against thy will, since thy will is not greater than thy power. But it would have to be greater if thou thyself were greater than thyself, for the will and power of God are God himself. And what can take thee by surprise, since thou knowest all, and there is no sort of nature but thou knowest it? And what more should we say about why that substance which God is cannot be corrupted? Because if this were so, it could not be God. And I kept seeking for an answer to the question, whence is evil? And I sought it in an evil way, and I did not see the evil in my very search. I marshaled before the sight of my spirit all creation, all that we see of earth and sea and air, and the stars and trees and animals, and all that we do not see, the firmament of the sky above, and all the angels, and all the spiritual things, for my imagination arranged these also as if they were bodies in this place or that. And I pictured to myself thy creation as one vast mass, composed of various kinds of bodies, some of which were actually bodies, some of those which I imagined spirits were like. I pictured this mass as vast, of course, not in its full dimensions, for these I could not know, but as large as I could possibly think, still only finite on every side. But thou, O Lord, I imagined as environing the mass on every side and penetrating it, still infinite in every direction, as if there were a sea everywhere, and everywhere through measureless space nothing but an infinite sea, and it contained within itself some sort of sponge, huge but still finite, so that the sponge would in all its parts be filled from the immeasurable sea. Thus I conceived thy creation itself to be finite, and filled by thee, the infinite. And I said, behold God, and behold what God hath created. God is good, yea, most mightily and incomparably better than all his works, but yet he who is good has created them good. Behold how he encircles and fills them.